Welcome to the first Ship of the Week of 2024. This week's ship is the SS Czar. In the early 1910s, Russian-American Line, a property of the East Asiatic Steamship Company, ordered a new liner for service between Le Beau and New York City. Launched in March of 1912, the 430-foot SS Czar was on the smaller and slower side among Atlantic liners, with her dual quadruple expansion engines managing to drive her up to a moderate 15 knots. Late the following year, after entering service, the ship received a panicked distress call while crossing the Atlantic, and happened upon the Uranium Line steamship, and yes, apparently such a company as Uranium Line did exist, SS Volturno, which had apparently burst into flames sometime earlier. Czar, along with multiple other ships that happened by, were able to stand by, and using their boats and Volturno's boats, transfer survivors from the blazing ship, with Czar alone picking up more than 100 people. Indeed, so impressed were British authorities at the crew's successful rescue effort that King George V of the United Kingdom honored more than a dozen of them with the Silver Sea Gallantry Medal for life-saving valor. Czar continued to service New York and various Russian ports through the early years of the First World War, albeit facing increasing danger. But following the collapse of the Russian imperial government, she left Russian service entirely and entered British operation, eventually falling into Cunard's vast fleet of troopships and transports in late 1917. Between April and October of 1918, Czar carried American infantrymen east to France, sailing 3 round trips without much incident, and spent the rest of the war and immediate post-war years ferrying British and Allied troops around the Eastern Theater. Czar returned to commercial service for her original parent company in 1920 under a new name and flying a new house flag as Baltic American Line's SS Estonia, sailing a route very near to that which she used under Russian-American between Le Beau and New York. Following nearly a decade of service, she was purchased by the Polish Transatlantic Shipping Company, her name shifting again in the spring of 1930 to Pulaski. By 1935, she was moved off the New York route and was instead servicing Gdynia to Buenos Aires, a route she would continue to follow until the ominous posturing in Europe came to another dramatic head for the second time in the ship's career, and she suddenly found herself hurriedly moving Polish troops from Greece to France. In the following spring, with Poland already fallen to German tanks, Pulaski was transferred to the French Fabre line for service under military escort to their colonial ports, predominantly in Africa. She was sailing exclusively in convoy by that point because any other way would have been far too dangerous. By June, however, the administrative capacity to organize such efforts was falling apart, and just days after she arrived at Freetown, Sierra Leone, on June 18th, France, too, had fallen. She sailed for Conakry in Guinea the following month and was prevented from leaving by colonial authorities loyal to the new Vichy French government in Paris, so the ship made a mad dash out of the harbor under a hail of artillery fire. Still carrying many of her crew of, by now, likely bewildered Polish officers and men that left Gdynia the previous summer, Pulaski found herself under the jurisdiction of the British government for the second time. She ferried men back and forth across the Atlantic world, between the British Isles, the war-torn mainland Europe, Iceland, colonial holdings in Africa, and even occasionally further afield. Sailing around the Cape of Good Hope in early 1942 to continue her trooping operations in the Indian Ocean rather than the Atlantic, she was returning to Britain every once in a while for repairs, including one instance following a fire that partially obliterated her bridge and wheelhouse, which are quite important things to have undamaged. Following the war, the ship was transferred from the Lamport and Holt Line, the British shipping firm that had operated her during the conflict, to the British government proper, which gave her the name Empire Penryn, joining countless merchant ships under the Empire naming scheme employed in wartime activities and post-war transport following the conclusion of hostilities. The ship continued to serve as a British trooper, with her last few years spent in the Mediterranean, until her scrapping in northern England in 1950, after nearly 40 years of service almost certainly thoroughly worn out.